Have you seen a dealer cut like this in your game? Well, it might look okay, but it's a procedural breach that allows people like me to do things like this. Today we're going to look at what is a seemingly quite small procedural breach in the dealing procedure, which can be a very costly mistake to ignore. The lack of a full two-hand release before the cut. This flies by the vast majority of players, either because they don't realise it's a procedural breach, or because they don't realise how dangerous it is. This has been used to devastate an effect. I'll show you exactly what a skilled card cheat can do if they're allowed this breach, and exactly what's happening. So let's get some cards on the table. Okay, so let's start with what should happen.
Then a two-hand release and a one-hand cut onto a cut card.
A two-hand release. Sounds like a small point. As we'll see, it isn't. That was George Joseph, and he's exactly right. Both hands need to let go of the deck. That's the key point. A lot of dealers don't do the full release. They skip it because it's a faster way of working through the procedure. But just one hand on the deck, even momentarily, can open the door to a card sharp, like this. So, we're seeing a slug of cards, in this case of 4 aces, being controlled through the casino procedure and cut back into play here. Obviously this wouldn't be done in a game. The 4 aces is a proxy for a stack of cards. If you want to see how that's done, check out the run-up video. But we're about to see a non-released one-handed cut here. Right hand never left the deck, and the cut facilitates the slug control. Just for the record, those cards were Chem casino grade plastics. The type of cards that have been used for decades to deal poker in private games, in casinos. We only use plastics at sharp edges. In the demo, I mimicked exactly what a lot of legit dealers will do here, only release with one hand. Because of my background, the lack of a full release was something I was really tuned into at the tables. But, and I've said this earlier, but it's really important, it doesn't mean that the dealer's not legit. It's usually just a bad habit. But, having said that, it is worth looking out for because it can often be the first sign that something's not quite right. And the lack of a full release, if a dishonest dealer is allowed that breach, then that can open a door to a lot of possibilities, a lot of options. If you let someone like me cut like that, then I can make a lot of bad things happen at the table. Most players don't realise the options it gives the card man. Now that we've seen a little bit of what can be done and we know that that breach is bad, let's take a look at exactly what the card man is actually doing with that breach and how it's facilitating his options at the table. Okay, so what's actually happening? By being allowed just to keep one hand on the deck, the sharp can hold a division in the deck. It's what cardmen call a break. That break is marking the position for the cut. It's akin to keeping your page in a book. The people who came up with the casino shuffle procedure obviously knew this was an issue, and that's why they stipulate a two-hand release, because you need one hand on the deck at least to keep that break. At this point, it would be a fair question to ask, but if there's a division in the deck, then surely that's going to be visible, especially when the dealer's surrounded by players. Well, if you're dealing with our old friend, the rough cheat, then yeah, it might be visible. But if you're dealing with a capable card man, there's no vulnerable angle, no vulnerable angle at all. Take a look at this. So here we see in the deck exactly as it would look just before the cut. As you can see, there's no sign of the break there. Now that is the break being held by the right thumb there, but there's no sign of it. The only vulnerable angle is the dealer's angle. Can't see anything from the right hand side because the hand covers it. Deck is slid as the cut is made. Slid back as the cut is made. So the deck is in motion when it's in that state. So as you can see, it can be really deceptive. Don't forget that the deck is only in that state for a second, just while the dealer slides the cut card in for the cut. In the demo, I even lingered on it a little bit. I could do it much quicker than that. So there'd be less time where the deck was in that state. And as you can see in the demo, a good card man will keep the deck in motion while it's in that state. So it's even more difficult to notice. A good card man will slide the deck back across the felt as if making space for the cut card as he holds that break, because that makes it even more difficult to see. Sliding the deck around on the felt would seem a bit weird, but a good card man will never do anything without there being some sort of motivation for it. So when he moves the deck across the felt, ostensibly it's to make some space for the cut card. There's a motivation for it. So it's very difficult to notice that. It's psychologically invisible. But that sliding motion is there for a reason. Because there is a weakness to this move, even when done by a very capable card man. The weakness is the seam. So onto some protection notes. This is not easy to spot if done well, but there is a tell to it, and that's the seam. If you note that a dealer isn't fully releasing, and you're not feeling particularly comfortable with that, then see if you can see the telltale seam that runs around the deck when a break is being held. The seam is not always there, sometimes it's totally hidden, but it often is there. And if a dealer is running this play multiple times in an evening, you get multiple looks to see if you can see it. Unfortunately for cardmen, the seam is usually more visible when there's strong lighting from above, which is typical in card rooms. If you notice that seam, and you notice it maybe even multiple times, and you notice it at that point in the procedure too, then you might be onto something there. That dealer might not be on the square, and it might not be a game you want to stay in, you might want to cash out. So I've mentioned a couple of times that seeing a dealer that isn't fully releasing is absolutely not a categorical indicator that there's cheating going on. However, here's the bad news. Seeing a dealer that fully releases both hands off the deck before the cut is also not categorical proof that he's on the square either, because that procedure can unfortunately also be beaten. We've seen what can be done by a good card man when he's allowed to hold a break. But the bad news is that a top card man doesn't need the break. I don't want to scare anybody here, because we're talking about a very small percentage of card sharps even. But if you're unfortunate enough to end up in a game with one of those people, the elite level, then you might be seeing a full two-hand release, and the game still isn't on the square. If you watch my other videos, I always endeavour to adhere to the riffle, riffle, strip, riffle procedure, but I also always do a full two-hand release in those videos. So, with the same deck in play, those chems, they're completely unmodified, plastics. This is what it looks like with a full release. So now we're going to see the full release. Exactly the same procedure, riffle, riffle, strip, riffle, cut. 4 aces being controlled again as a proxy for a stacked slug. Now, both hands are off the deck, exactly as they should be, no hesitation in the cut. But the slug is still controlled. Again, I don't want to scare anyone here. You'd be super unlucky to run into this kind of thing for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the tech for actually beating the procedure with a full release, it just isn't out there that I can tell. Not readily available anyway. Secondly, the methods that I'm aware of are very difficult to do, especially with plastic cards. Paper cards make things a lot easier, but they're never used in games, so it's very difficult to do. The fact that the tech on the two-hand release is so difficult to do means that very few card men are actually going to be able to do it under fire. As I've mentioned in my other videos, it's all well and good to do this work at your kitchen table, to be a kitchen table card man, as my old mentor used to say. But it's very different to do it under those lights when it's game time. That's very different. Anyway, let's get on to some final thoughts. Okay, final thoughts. It's always surprised me how this particular break-in procedure seems to be so universally tolerated by players. In my time, when I was active, I saw many dealers fail to release the deck with one hand before the cut. I never saw anybody call any of them on it, not once. I played with many players who were not shy about calling the floor when they felt the procedure was breached. And if a dealer didn't make the final cut in a procedure, you can guarantee that they get chirps from the players. But allowing one hand to stay on the deck like this is as dangerous as allowing the dealer to not even do that cut, because it nullifies it. I think what it really comes down to is ignorance. Players don't understand that it's a problem to allow that. It's also something they're used to seeing because it's been built in by legit dealers doing it a lot. Those two factors mean a sharp can get away with this all the time. Like I've said earlier, this procedural breach doesn't really mean anything in terms of is somebody cheating, because it's so prevalent against non-cheating dealers. But it's a piece of the puzzle, and that's the takeaway. It's a piece of the puzzle. If you see it, maybe just keep an eye on that procedure and that dealer. But don't go seeing ghosts, seeing cheating everywhere. Anyway, thanks for watching.